In the year 2000, Enron Corporation was named America's most innovative company. For the sixth year in a row, its stock was at $90 a share. Wall Street analysts called it a must-buy. Business schools used it as a model of what a modern company should look like. 1 year later, it was gone. $74 billion, 20,000 jobs, 16 years of lies. This is how it happened. Anatomy of greed. What you're about to see lasted 16 years. 37,000 investors trusted this company with their savings. And for most of that time, the people who were supposed to protect you looked the other way. Her name was Janice Farmer. She had worked at Enron since 1985, the year it was founded. She was 53 years old. She had 2 daughters, a mortgage in suburban Houston, and a retirement plan that, on paper, looked solid. Like most of her co-workers, she had invested heavily in Enron stock. The company had encouraged it. Executives told employees it was the best investment they could make. Internal memos called it a sure thing. She wasn't greedy. She was loyal. By December 2001, her retirement account, everything she had saved over 16 years, was worth less than $2,000. She was not the exception. She was the rule. To understand how this was allowed to happen, to her, and to 20,000 people like her, we need to go back. All the way back to where this story really starts. Enron was born in 1985 from the merger of 2 natural gas pipeline companies, Houston Natural Gas and Internorth. The new company was simple by design. It owned pipes. Gas moved through them. The company charged a fee. It was boring, predictable, and profitable. But boring wasn't going to be enough for the man who would come to define Enron. Jeffrey Skilling was a consultant at McKinsey when Enron first hired him. He had an MBA from Harvard Business School, where he had been described by professors as one of the sharpest minds they had ever taught. He was driven, brilliant, and absolutely certain that he understood how the world should work. His idea was radical for 1990. Treat energy like a financial product. Don't just move gas through pipes. Buy it, sell it, trade contracts on it, create markets for it. Apply the logic of Wall Street to the commodity that powered America. And through the 1990s, it worked. Enron expanded from gas into electricity, then into water utilities, then broadband, then weather derivatives, instruments that let companies bet on whether it would rain. If you could put a price on it, Enron would trade it. Revenue grew from $10 billion in 1992 to $101 billion in 2000. To put that in context, $101 billion made Enron the 7th largest company in the United States. Larger than Boeing, larger than Disney, approaching the size of General Motors. Fortune called it a revolution. Wall Street called it a once-in-a-generation company. Business schools assigned it as required reading. But here is what nobody was saying out loud. Enron's financial statements, the documents that were supposed to tell investors and the public exactly how the company made its money, were, by any reasonable standard, incomprehensible. Pages of dense footnotes, entities with no explanation, numbers that connected to other numbers that led nowhere. At the time, most people assumed that complexity meant sophistication, that if you couldn't understand it, you simply weren't smart enough. That assumption cost a lot of people everything they had. Before we get to how the fraud was built, there's a name that often gets less attention than Skilling or Fastow, but who may have been the most important piece of the puzzle. Kenneth Lay, the founder and chairman of Enron. Lay was a different kind of figure. Where Skilling was sharp and aggressive, Lay was charming and political. He had a PhD in economics. He was a close friend of the Bush family, both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. He donated millions to political campaigns and was known across Washington as one of the most connected businessmen in America. Those connections mattered. Through the 1990s, Enron lobbied aggressively for energy deregulation, for the removal of government oversight on the energy markets it was building, and it largely succeeded. By the late 1990s, electricity markets in several states had been deregulated, opening the door for companies like Enron to operate with almost no constraints. Lay called himself a free market evangelist. He believed, genuinely, that less regulation was always better, that markets were self-correcting, that fraud, if it existed, would be punished by the market itself. He was wrong. But by the time that became clear, he had already built the environment that made the fraud possible. And he had made himself very, very wealthy in the process. Now we get to the mechanism. The actual machinery of how $74 billion was hidden for 16 years. The architect was Andrew Fastow, Enron's chief financial officer. He was 36 years old. He had been hired specifically because he understood complex financial structures, and he used that knowledge to build something that was, in its own twisted way, a work of engineering. He called them Special Purpose Entities, SPEs. The term sounds technical. The concept is simple. Imagine you have a debt you don't want anyone to know about. So you create a separate company, on paper, and transfer the debt to that company. Now your own balance sheet looks clean. The debt hasn't disappeared. It's just somewhere else. Somewhere no one is looking. Fastow created hundreds of these entities. He gave them names that sounded official: LJM Cayman, Raptor, Jedi, Chuco. Each one existed to absorb Enron's bad investments, its failed projects, its mounting losses. And each time a loss was transferred, Enron's public financial statements looked a little bit healthier than they actually were. At its peak, Enron had hidden over $1 billion in debt inside these structures. But that's only half of what made this so extraordinary. Fastow was also personally profiting from the shell companies he created. He charged Enron management fees. He took equity stakes. He collected performance bonuses. He made $30 million from companies whose entire purpose was to protect the company that was paying him a salary to work in its interest. And then there is Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was Enron's external auditor. This is a firm that exists for one reason: to independently verify that a company's financial statements are true, that investors, employees, and pensioners can trust what they're being told. Andersen reviewed Enron's books every year. It signed off on the SPEs. It approved the financial statements that were sent to investors. And it collected $85 million in fees from Enron in a single year to do so. Arthur Andersen signed off on every report. Every single one. In March 2001, 9 months before the collapse, a financial journalist named Bethany McLean published a short article in Fortune magazine. The title was a simple question: is Enron overpriced? McLean had noticed something that billions of dollars of professional analysis had missed, or ignored. She couldn't figure out how Enron actually made money. The financial statements were structured in a way that made it nearly impossible to trace where revenue came from or where it went. She called Enron's investor relations department and asked them to walk her through it. They couldn't do it. Jeffrey Skilling, when confronted about the article, called McLean unethical. Ken Lay flew to New York to meet personally with Fortune's editors and pressure them to kill the story. The stock was at $80. Nobody wanted to hear it. The article ran. It was largely dismissed for exactly 7 more months. Before the collapse, there was one more chapter of the Enron story that rarely gets the attention it deserves. In 2000 and 2001, California suffered a series of catastrophic energy blackouts. Rolling power cuts across the state, hospitals on backup generators, factories shut down, ordinary families paying 4, 5, 6 times what they had paid for electricity the year before. At the time, state officials were told this was a supply crisis, that there simply wasn't enough electricity, that prices were responding to market forces. It was a lie. After the collapse, internal Enron recordings were released. Traders on those calls, in their own voices, described deliberately shutting down power plants to create artificial shortages, gaming the deregulated market to drive prices up, laughing as they described how much money the company was extracting from California. California's energy crisis cost the state an estimated $30 billion. Ordinary residents, hospitals, small businesses, they paid that bill. Enron booked it as profit. The end came fast, faster than almost anyone expected. In August 2001, Jeffrey Skilling announced his resignation as CEO after just 6 months in the role. He cited personal reasons. He had also, in the months prior, sold $60 million of Enron stock. In October, Enron was forced to report a $618 million quarterly loss, the first public acknowledgement that something was very wrong. The same month, the SEC opened a formal investigation. Fastow was fired. What followed was a collapse in slow motion, except it wasn't slow. Within weeks, credit agencies downgraded Enron's debt to junk. Banks refused to extend credit. Trading partners walked away. The stock, which had been at $90 just 14 months earlier, fell below $1. On December 2nd, 2001, Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history at the time, a record it held for less than a year, until WorldCom, another fraud, surpassed it in 2002. 20,000 Enron employees received termination notices that month. Security escorted them out of the building. They were given 30 minutes to clear their desks. Many of them found out that day that their 401k retirement plans, which Enron had encouraged them to load with company stock, had lost nearly all their value. The executives who encouraged them to buy that stock had already sold theirs. 16 years of someone's life, reduced to a cardboard box and a walk across a parking lot. Let's look at what accountability looked like. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted of fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. His sentence was later reduced. He served 12 years. He was released in 2019 and is alive today. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty to wire fraud and securities fraud. He cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 6 years. Kenneth Lay was convicted on 6 counts of fraud and conspiracy in May 2006. He died of a heart attack in July 2006, before sentencing. Under American law, his conviction was vacated upon his death. He was never formally sentenced. Arthur Andersen, the firm that approved every fraudulent statement, was indicted for obstruction of justice and dissolved. 85,000 people lost their jobs worldwide, most of whom had nothing to do with Enron. And Janice? She and the thousands of employees like her were included in the bankruptcy settlement. The average payout to former employees was approximately $3,000. 16 years of work, $3,000. Before we close, 5 things you should take with you. 1. When a company's financial statements cannot be understood by an intelligent, educated adult, that is not sophistication. That is a design choice. Enron's reports were deliberately built to obscure. If you cannot explain, in 2 sentences, how a company makes its money, walk away. 2. Watch what executives do with their own shares. Jeffrey Skilling sold $60 million of stock in the months before the collapse. Fastow and other insiders sold hundreds of millions more across the preceding years. When the people who know the most about a company are quietly selling, pay attention. 3. When every analyst, every magazine, and every bank agrees that something is a great investment, be skeptical. Consensus is not the same as truth. The loudest agreement often signals that people have stopped asking questions. 4. When a company invests heavily in political connections and lobbying, ask what it is protecting itself from. Enron spent tens of millions ensuring that oversight of its markets was limited. Companies that fear regulation often have good reason to. 5. When a company or its executives respond to legitimate questions with personal attacks, legal threats, or pressure campaigns, as Skilling did with Bethany McLean, that is your answer. Honest companies answer questions. Dishonest ones try to make you afraid to ask them. Enron was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of attention. Specific people made specific choices for a very long time and were protected by institutions that were supposed to stop exactly this from happening. The next episode covers a man who did the same thing for 48 years, with thousands of clients who trusted him completely, and a regulator who was warned multiple times and did nothing. Anatomy of Greed.